Dude, I don't even know what to do at this point. Come on, what the hell? Did that just work?
So it was a pain in the ass. But nevertheless, it is time for Windows 98 in 2023. I had tried something similar before, but as you saw with the other PC, I couldn't install anything below Windows 2000. So it was time to throw that PC out for a brand new old one. Well, it's a little complicated. I wanted a PC that was old enough to run Windows 98, but also new enough to install a newer operating system on it. So it was time to go PC hunting, which at first I was looking at Pentium 3 and Pentium 2 computers, because that's what I had as a kid. But those specs were abysmal. Like, it could run Windows 98, and then like XP maybe, but literally nothing more. Well, this was a time when computers were getting rapidly faster. What? They were more from the XP era, but would work perfectly fine with Windows 98. So I settled on this HP Pavilion 533C, which would turn out to be a giant mistake, but we'll get to that. It has a gigabyte of DDR RAM, DDR1, an Intel Pentium 4 2.4 gigahertz, and no hard drive. I know all these listings have no hard drive. And also I've learned that anything below Windows XP doesn't really play nice with USB. So I bought a PS2 keyboard and mouse, a 40 gig hard drive, and yeah, everything seems to be working fine. Great, right? Okay, so the big question is, how am I going to install an operating system? Well, here, just use a bootable USB. Shut the f up. Sorry, that was a little. Like I said, anything below Windows XP didn't really play nice with USB. So we've got to use flop CDs. We're going to use CDs. But how am I supposed to burn the CD? If I need the CD to install an operating system on the PC, I need to burn the CD. Well, we need a CD burner and blank CDs, which, by the way, macOS Sonoma still supports burning CDs. So I burned a Windows 98 ISO onto a CD and nothing. So I was like, maybe it doesn't work on a CD burned on a Mac. So I tried burning another CD through Windows, which the burner is hidden deep within Windows 11, and still nothing. So I was like, maybe a Windows XP CD will boot? And yeah, it did. So I just installed XP, hoping to find a solution later, and this was about to be the first sign of trouble to come, but I didn't know that yet. Okay, so the colors, they're off. Just a little bit. But this was a good opportunity to look at the detailed specs of this machine, because this PC has been wiped clean off the internet. Like, literally, HP's like, oh, is this the PC you're looking for? Oh, you want drivers for this? Nah, f off. Why erase it? Just let me look at the specs of these. So I installed CPU-Z to look at the chipset graphics and install the correct drivers, and yeah, it looks fine now. Except that means jack shit, because the video is titled I tried to use Windows 98 in 2023, not Windows XP. Okay, so I had an epiphany. I remember reading somewhere that the retail copy of Windows 98 is not bootable, only the OEM version. Baffling, but sure enough, the OEM copy boots. Cool. And then promptly fails after the disk scan. Oh my god. Although it occurred to me that the XP partition might be throwing Windows 98 off, so I deleted the XP partition and that worked. It was pretty much smooth sailing from here on out, until we got to the desktop. Okay, so quick history lesson on Windows 98. So Windows 98 was released in 1998 and was generally regarded as, yeah, it's alright status from people. Not the same hype as Windows 95, but it did sell more so. This was supposed to be the last version to be based on MS-DOS, while everything newer was supposed to be based on the NT kernel. This, by the way, is going to be the root cause of 99% of the problems we're about to face, the outdated DOS kernel. This, however, turned out not to be true, because Microsoft released Windows ME in 2000, and that was DOS-based, but that's a whole nother story. What we're actually using is Windows 98 SE, that came out in May 1999. It's just less of a pain to use today, but that's enough history. Let's get back to the video. Okay, so this is the next part of problems. As you can see, the desktop looks weird. It's on the lowest resolution in color depth. And if you plug in a USB stick, it's not going to detect it because we need USB drivers. But I need the USB stick to install the USB drivers. So the only option left was to burn a 700 megabyte CD for a 3 megabyte driver. Because short of a floppy, this is the only communication with this PC. And once installed, yeah, the USB stick works. So now we can get to installing drivers. So the first step was to install the graphics drivers. What graphics, you might say? Well, there's an onboard GPU for basic displaying and stuff. And since CPU-Z from XP told us which graphics card and motherboard this is, we've gotten it working. Although this is such an underpowered card that it can't display all the colors at 1080p. It just crashes. This is a problem that probably nobody has faced in the past 20 years. And I don't think this onboard GPU was going to do any kind of 3D acceleration anyways. So back to eBay to look for a new graphics card. This is exciting. Although our options are severely limited because of the PC I picked. So this motherboard only has PCI slots, and most cards from this time use AGP, which is a long outdated standard, but it was the standard back then. So I was stuck with a few low budget options. Not like low budget today, low budget even back then. So I settled on this NVIDIA FX 5200, which a quick Google search will show you a pile of people shitting on this card. Like literally, even people today are like, don't buy this card unless you have to, and I have to, so. But of course we have no drivers, so I installed drivers and Yeah, so without safe mode, which disables all the drivers, Windows 98 no longer boots. Also, just a side note about Windows 98, by the way, once you install a driver, it's pretty hard to uninstall it, because once you remove it and reboot the PC just reinstalls it and then promptly proceeds to crash, which is dumb, but whatever. So I tried a few different drivers to no avail. But looking at the forum, someone pointed out that you need to install the chipset drivers before the graphics drivers, which is actually quite a clever insight. See, the chipset is what allows everything on the motherboard to communicate with everything else, so no wonder the graphics card keeps malfunctioning. So I installed the chipset drivers, about 10 different drivers, with the same result. So I was like, F it, that's it, we need to reinstall Windows 98. So I did, install the chipset drivers first, and then the graphics drivers, and the same f***ing result. At this point, I was starting to lose my marbles. But I did a little digging, and it turns out I'm an idiot. See, I thought this was the i865 chipset because that's the most popular one. But in CPUs, it clearly said i845. We all make mistakes, let's move on. So this whole time I was installing the wrong chipset drivers. So I installed the correct ones and the GPU drivers, and that worked. Thank you. Just a side note, by the way, I don't know if you can see this in the video, but there's a weird haze on the monitor, which I was hoping is a cable issue, and it is, because I bought a new cable and that fixed it. But before we try some games on here, I wanted to get the sound card working, which this PC does seem to have a sound card on board, but since there's not a single mention of this PC on the internet, let alone drivers, I was left to try out every single common sound driver on the internet, which obviously didn't work. This is one of the problems I see now, that I should have picked a PC that I could find drivers for before buying it, and instead I picked a PC that I can't even find the exact specs for. So I was like, F it, there's 2 more PCI slots, I'll just buy a sound card from this era. Checked if there are sound drivers available, and then bought this Creative Sound Blaster 128. So I installed the card, installed the drivers, and it asked me for a bunch of missing files. I mean, the driver clearly said Windows 98, but apparently not. And looking at the forums, all solutions link to an update, which is long gone because this is more than 20 years old. I tried about 10 different drivers, but sadly, I think we're gonna have to live without sound for this one. Okay, so I know this is well before my time. I mean, Windows 98 is older than me, but I grew up playing games on a Windows 98 PC, because that's all the technology I have. So the first game I remember that I had to try was Mortal Kombat 4 from 1997. I don't know how I got away with playing this game when I was 6, but nevertheless. I tried to download it, but apparently it's not abandonware because someone is still selling it. This is bad news for us because we want the old version from 1997, not the new version for Windows 10. So I found a CD ISO, but alas, it only works in demo mode. Tried fixing it, but we only get to the first cutscene, which I do not remember it being live action. Come to think of it, wasn't there a live action Mortal Kombat movie in the 90s as well? Unfortunately, the fix gets us stuck in this loop. So I was like, okay, fine, I'll buy the game, but surprise, surprise, it doesn't work on Windows 98. But I have Windows 11 on my Mac, so here's some gameplay from that. Okay, so next up I wanted to try Need for Speed from this era. So I decided on Need for Speed 3 Hot Pursuit. No, not the one you're thinking about, the one from 1998, which worked. Oh, thank God. So I jumped into a race and it turns out all the cars are unlocked from the beginning. Also, literally there's like no career. You just do different races in different locales. And also, it's not open world. Is this the way the game's supposed to be? I never actually played this one as a kid. I hopped into a race and I was like, ugh, I need to up the graphics. Just to find out, these are the max graphics. Should've known. But yeah, it seems like a fun time. Next, I wanted to try Half-Life, which I'm gonna be honest, I have no clue about. But it runs on Windows 98 and is from this era. Although I was just sitting there for this long ass intro, after which I finally started walking just to get stuck at this point. Maybe they said something in the audio, but obviously we have no audio. Although the graphics seem to be pretty cutting edge for the 90s. I then tried House of the Dead, which again was one of my childhood favorites, and it refused to run. I don't know why all these games I wanted to play just don't run, but it is what it is. So yeah, it was mildly inconvenient, let's put it that way. Well, I used Windows 98 as a kid, but I never really had to tinker, install hardware, or drivers for it, so it was kind of a shock to experience how archaic things were. If anything, this just makes me appreciate the current state of Windows so much more. Like with Windows 7 onwards, your computer's so much more functional. You don't even need sound drivers, but a fresh Windows 98 install is basically useless. And because I was using XP on this same PC, that felt like such a giant leap just 3 years after Windows 98. It's so much more stable, reliable, and well supported. That's all thanks to the NT kernel, which we still use. Crazy to think that 20 years ago, the average ordinary person would be clueless as to how to get this machine working, but we've come very far.